Standing in that sterile courtroom, watching my mother sob into her handkerchief while my father nodded gravely beside her, I felt the familiar sting of betrayal pierce through me once again. "We gave you every opportunity and you threw it away," she wailed to Judge Harrison, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. My own parents were testifying against me in a lawsuit that could destroy everything I had built from nothing. But they had no idea what was about to happen next. My name is Dusty, and this nightmare began long before we ever stepped foot in that Maricopa County courthouse. To understand how my own flesh and blood could sit across from me in a legal battle, you need to know where it all started. Growing up in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, I lived in a modest ranch house on Cactus Road, where the desert heat made everything shimmer like a mirage. My parents Frank and Linda owned Morrison Hardware, a struggling family business that barely kept food on our table. The store occupied a corner lot on Main Street, surrounded by newer chain stores that slowly choked the life out of small businesses like theirs. Frank was a man who believed hard work and stubbornness could solve any problem. He had calloused hands from 30 years of handling tools and supplies, and he wore the same faded flannel shirts every day like a uniform. Linda managed the books with an old calculator that required 3 attempts to get accurate totals. She dreamed of expansion but never understood why customers preferred Home Depot over their cramped aisles and outdated inventory. From the time I could walk, they assumed I would inherit their legacy. "This store will be yours someday, son," Frank would say, while showing me how to organize screws by size. But while other kids played video games, I was drawn to the ancient computer they kept in the back office for inventory. The machine fascinated me more than anything in their store ever could. By high school, I was already building websites for local businesses and fixing computers for neighbors. Technology felt like breathing to me, natural and essential. But when I announced my intention to study computer science at Arizona State University, the house erupted in arguments that lasted for months. "You're abandoning everything we worked for," Linda screamed during one particularly heated discussion. "We sacrificed for 18 years to give you opportunities we never had, and this is how you repay us." Frank's disappointment cut deeper than her anger. "I thought I raised a son who understood loyalty and responsibility. Apparently, I was wrong about your character." Despite their protests, I enrolled at ASU with a partial scholarship and 3 part-time jobs to cover expenses. I washed dishes at a campus restaurant, tutored struggling students in mathematics, and worked weekends at a computer repair shop. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford, but freedom tasted sweeter than rest. In my cramped dormitory room, I started building what would eventually become Phoenix Digital Solutions. Using a second-hand laptop and free software development tools, I created inventory management systems for small businesses. My first client paid me $200 for a program that saved them thousands in efficiency improvements. Word spread quickly through Phoenix's tight-knit business community. Meanwhile, my parents' store continued declining. Customers complained about their limited selection and outdated point-of-sale system that still required manual credit card processing. I watched from a distance as their American dream slowly crumbled, and despite our strained relationship, I couldn't stand idle. For 5 years, I secretly sent money home. Every month, I transferred whatever I could spare from my growing tech business directly into their store's operating account. The amounts started small, maybe $300 or $400, but grew larger as my client base expanded. By my senior year, I was contributing nearly $2,000 monthly to keep Morrison Hardware afloat. I never told them where the money came from. Linda assumed their business was finally turning around, while Frank credited his improved vendor relationships. They never suspected their supposedly irresponsible son was single-handedly preventing their bankruptcy. During family gatherings, they continued portraying me as a disappointment. At Christmas dinner, Linda would tell relatives about my computer hobby that prevented me from joining the family business. Frank would shake his head sadly and say, "We gave Dusty every opportunity to build something meaningful, but he chose to chase fantasies instead." Their words stung, but I convinced myself they would eventually understand. I imagined the day I could reveal my success and watch pride replace their disappointment. That fantasy kept me going through countless sleepless nights spent coding and debugging software solutions. By 28, Phoenix Digital Solutions employed 12 people and generated over $3 million in annual revenue. We specialized in custom software for manufacturing companies, helping them streamline operations and reduce costs. My team occupied a modern office complex in Scottsdale, complete with standing desks, collaborative workspaces, and a break room stocked with organic snacks. Still, I maintained my financial support for my parents' store. The monthly transfers had grown to nearly $4,000, enough to cover their rent, utilities, and basic inventory. Morrison Hardware showed modest profits on paper, though the reality was far different. Then everything changed 6 months ago. My parents filed a lawsuit claiming I had stolen their intellectual property and demanding 60% ownership of my company. According to their complaint, they had provided the original business concepts and financial backing that made Phoenix Digital Solutions possible. The accusation felt like a physical blow. Not only was it completely false, but it demonstrated how little they understood about my work or my character. I had built everything from nothing using skills they never appreciated and determination they never acknowledged. Now, sitting in that courtroom watching Linda's theatrical performance, I realized they had crossed a line from mere disappointment into active destruction. Marcus Webb, their attorney, was a slick-haired man in an expensive suit who spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to easy victories over smaller opponents. "Your Honor," Webb addressed Judge Harrison with practiced sincerity, "my clients are hard-working Americans who taught their son everything he knows about business. They provided the foundation, the inspiration, and the initial capital that made his company possible. They deserve recognition and compensation for their contributions." Judge Harrison, a stern-faced man in his 60s with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, listened without visible emotion. He'd spent 30 years on the bench and possessed the rare ability to see through legal theatrics to underlying truth. Linda dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her voice trembling as she continued, "We gave Dusty every opportunity to succeed. We taught him about customer service, inventory management, and treating people with respect. Now, he acts like he built everything himself, but we know better." Frank nodded solemnly beside her, playing the role of the wounded father perfectly. "We just want what's fair, Your Honor. We invested our hearts and souls into raising that boy, and he owes us for the foundation we provided." My lawyer, Sarah Chen, remained calm throughout their performance. Sarah was a brilliant woman in her 40s who specialized in intellectual property cases. She had reviewed every document, interviewed every witness, and prepared for every possible argument Webb might present. But as I listened to my parents' lies echoing through that courtroom, I felt something break inside me. These were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, yet they were attempting to destroy everything I had accomplished. The betrayal cut deeper than any business dispute ever could. What they didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that I had been preparing for this moment longer than they realized. The evidence I had gathered would shock everyone in that courtroom, including Sarah. But first I had to endure watching the people who raised me lie under oath about the son who had quietly saved them from financial ruin. Judge Harrison finally spoke his voice, carrying the authority of decades spent weighing truth against deception. We'll hear from the defendant's counsel after a brief recess. This court stands adjourned for 15 minutes. As the gavel fell, I caught my mother's eye across the courtroom. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw something that chilled me to the bone. There was no love there, no regret, no recognition of the man I had become. There was only cold calculation and the hunger for money that had apparently replaced whatever maternal feelings she once possessed. The foundation of pain they had built over decades was about to crumble, but the destruction would be far more complete than they could possibly imagine. After the recess, Sarah Chen rose to present our defense, her movements precise and confident. She had built her reputation by dismantling false claims with methodical precision, and today would be no exception. Your Honor, Sarah began, her voice clear and measured. The plaintiff's claims are not only baseless, but represent a calculated attempt to steal the fruits of my client's labor through fabricated evidence and emotional manipulation. She gestured toward a stack of financial documents on her table. Phoenix Digital Solutions is currently valued at $12.7 million, having grown from a one-person operation in a college dormitory to a thriving company that employs 26 people and serves over 200 clients across the southwestern United States. Linda's eyes widened at the numbers, her theatrical composure slipping momentarily. Frank leaned forward, his weathered hands gripping the plaintiff's table, as if the figures might disappear if he didn't hold on tight enough. Sarah continued. The plaintiffs claim they provided the original business idea and initial capital in 2019. However, bank records clearly show that Dusty Morrison founded Phoenix Digital Solutions in 2017 using his own savings from part-time work and small client projects. No money ever changed hands from the plaintiffs to the defendant. She pulled out a series of bank statements, each one highlighted to show deposits and withdrawals. Furthermore, rather than receiving financial support from his parents, Mr. Morrison has actually been supporting them. For the past 5 years, he has transferred over $180,000 to Morrison Hardware, keeping their business solvent, while they publicly characterized him as irresponsible and ungrateful. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as this revelation sank in. Several journalists in the gallery scribbled notes, furiously recognizing the human interest angle that would make their evening deadlines. But Sarah wasn't finished. We called Jake Morrison to the stand. My business partner and closest friend approached the witness stand with his usual easy confidence. Jake was a tall, athletic man with prematurely gray hair who had joined Phoenix Digital Solutions 3 years earlier as our head of sales and marketing. His background in corporate communications had helped us land several major contracts, and his loyalty had never wavered even during our most challenging periods. After being sworn in, Jake settled into the witness chair and looked directly at Judge Harrison. Your Honor, I've worked alongside Dusty for 3 years, and I've never met anyone with more integrity or business acumen. What's happening here today is not just legally wrong, it's morally reprehensible. Sarah guided him through his testimony with practiced efficiency. Mr. Morrison, can you describe your role at Phoenix Digital Solutions? I handle all client relationships and new business development. I also oversee our marketing efforts and maintain communication with existing accounts. Have you had any contact with the plaintiffs regarding the company's business affairs? Jake's expression darkened. Unfortunately, yes. About 4 months ago, Frank and Linda Morrison began contacting our clients, directly telling them that Dusty was mentally unstable and had stolen money from his family. They claimed the company was built on fraud and that clients should consider terminating their contracts. The gasps from the gallery were audible this time. Even Marcus Webb looked surprised, though he quickly masked his reaction behind professional neutrality. What was the result of these communications? Sarah asked. We lost 3 major contracts worth approximately $800,000 in annual revenue. Clients cited concerns about the stability of our leadership and questions about our business practices. It took weeks of damage control to prevent additional defections. Jake's voice grew more intense as he continued. But that wasn't all. Frank and Linda also contacted venture capital firms we were courting for expansion funding. They told potential investors that Dusty had a history of mental health issues and couldn't be trusted with large sums of money. Two deals worth a combined $4.5 million fell through directly because of their interference. Linda shot to her feet, her face flushed with indignation. That's a lie. We were protecting those people from being deceived by our son's schemes. Judge Harrison's gavel came down hard. Mrs. Morrison, you will remain seated and silent during testimony, or I will hold you in contempt. Continue, Mr. Morrison. Jake nodded grimly. The most disturbing part was how calculated it all seemed. They didn't just make random accusations. They researched our client base, identified our most conservative accounts, and tailored their stories to exploit specific concerns. Someone had coached them on exactly what to say and when to say it. Sarah presented additional evidence, email printouts, recorded voicemails, and witness statements from clients who had been contacted. The pattern was clear and damning. Frank and Linda hadn't acted on impulse or emotion. They had conducted a systematic campaign designed to destroy their son's business from the inside out. Mr. Morrison, Sarah continued, did the plaintiffs ever explain their motivation for these actions? During one phone call with our client at Southwest Manufacturing, Frank Morrison said, and I quote, "That ungrateful kid thinks he's smarter than everyone else. It's time someone knocked him down a few pegs and showed him what real consequences look like." The words hung in the air like poison gas. I watched my father's face crumble as his own words were thrown back at him under oath. The mask of wounded parenthood finally slipped, completely revealing the bitter, resentful man underneath. But Sarah had saved her most damaging revelation for last. Your Honor, we also have evidence that the plaintiffs have produced falsified documents to support their claims. She approached the evidence table and retrieved a manila folder. These are copies of what the plaintiffs claim are business plans and financial agreements from 2019 showing their contribution to Phoenix Digital Solutions. However, forensic document analysis reveals several anomalies. The documents were projected onto screens visible throughout the courtroom. Sarah used a laser pointer to highlight specific areas. First, the paper stock used in these documents wasn't manufactured until 2021. Second, the font is Calibri 11 point, which wasn't the default in Microsoft Word until a software update that occurred in late 2020. Finally, the letterhead logo uses a design element that Phoenix Digital Solutions didn't adopt until 2022. Marcus Webb was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. This forensic analysis wasn't disclosed during discovery. The documents in question weren't provided until yesterday afternoon, Sarah replied smoothly. We had them analyzed overnight by a certified forensic document examiner. His full report is available for the court's review. Judge Harrison studied the evidence carefully, his expression growing increasingly stern. I'll allow the testimony. Continue, counselor. Sarah turned back to the courtroom. These documents are forgeries created recently to support a fraudulent lawsuit. The plaintiffs have committed perjury by presenting them as authentic historical records. Frank's hands were shaking now, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Linda had gone pale. Her dramatic sobbing replaced by the stillness of someone who realizes their lies have been exposed. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Jake cleared his throat and looked directly at my parents. There's something else the court should know. Last week I received a phone call from Amanda Morrison, Dusty's sister. She told me their parents had offered her $20,000 to testify falsely in this case. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters jumped to their feet, spectators gasped and whispered, and Marcus Webb looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Judge Harrison banged his gavel repeatedly, his voice cutting through the noise. Order, I will have order in this courtroom. When quiet was restored, Jake continued with devastating calmness. Amanda was supposed to claim that Dusty had discussed stealing business ideas from his parents during family conversations. She initially agreed because she needed money for medical bills, but her conscience wouldn't let her go through with it. That's when she called to warn us about what was really happening here. Sarah nodded solemnly. Your Honor, we request that Amanda Morrison be called as a witness. Her testimony will shed light on the true nature of this conspiracy and the lengths to which the plaintiffs have gone to fabricate their case. Judge Harrison's eyes were hard as granite as he looked toward the plaintiff's table. Frank and Linda sat frozen, their American dream turned into an American nightmare of their own making. The web of deception they had woven was unraveling thread by thread, and there was nothing Marcus Webb could do to stop it. Given the serious nature of these allegations, Judge Harrison said slowly, "This court will take a 2-hour recess while I review the evidence and consider whether criminal charges should be referred to the district attorney's office. We will reconvene at 3 o'clock this afternoon." As the gavel fell again, I caught sight of my parents' faces. The confident accusers from this morning had been replaced by two desperate people who were beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. They had set out to destroy me, but instead they had destroyed themselves. The web of deception was about to become a trap of their own making, and there was no escape in sight. When court reconvened at 3 o'clock, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Word of the morning's revelations had spread through Phoenix's legal community, and the gallery was now packed with attorneys, journalists, and curious observers drawn by rumors of a family civil war. Amanda Morrison walked through the courtroom doors like a ghost returning to haunt the living. My sister had always been delicate with auburn hair and green eyes that seemed to hold secrets she wasn't ready to share. At 29, she carried herself with the careful movements of someone who had learned to navigate emotional minefields. I hadn't seen Amanda in nearly 2 years, not since our last explosive family gathering, where she had sided with our parents in their criticism of my life choices. Watching her approach the witness stand, I felt a mixture of hope and dread that she might finally tell the truth about our family's twisted dynamics. Amanda was sworn in with trembling hands, her voice barely audible as she confirmed her identity. Judge Harrison leaned forward slightly, his experienced eyes recognizing the signs of someone wrestling with a difficult decision. Marcus Webb rose for cross-examination, clearly hoping to discredit her testimony before it began. Ms. Morrison, isn't it true that you've struggled with substance abuse issues and have been in and out of rehabilitation facilities for the past 3 years? The question hit like a physical blow, but Amanda lifted her chin with newfound determination. Yes, I've battled addiction to prescription painkillers following a car accident, but I've been clean for 8 months, and my struggle with addiction doesn't change the facts of what I'm here to testify about. And isn't it also true that you've had financial difficulties and might say anything for money? Amanda's laugh was bitter and hollow. Mr. Webb, if I were willing to say anything for money, I'd be testifying for my parents right now. They offered me $20,000 to lie under oath. I'm here because my conscience won't let me watch them destroy my brother with fabricated evidence. She turned to face Frank and Linda, directly, her voice growing stronger with each word. I initially said yes to their offer. I needed money for medical bills, and $20,000 seemed like a fortune. They wanted me to testify that Dusty had told me about stealing business ideas from their hardware store. The story was completely false, but I was desperate enough to consider it. Linda's face had gone ashen, while Frank stared at the table as if he could make himself disappear through sheer willpower. Their lawyer looked like he was calculating how quickly he could withdraw from the case. Sarah Chen approached the witness stand with gentle professionalism. Amanda, what changed your mind about testifying falsely? I started thinking about what kind of person I would become if I helped destroy the only family member who ever really cared about me. You see, there's something this court doesn't know about our family history. Something my parents never wanted anyone to discover. She paused, gathering courage for what came next. Dusty isn't their biological son. He was adopted when he was 3 years old after his birth parents died in a house fire in Tucson. Frank and Linda took him in, but they never let him forget that he wasn't really theirs. The revelation hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. I felt the blood drain from my face, as childhood memories suddenly made sense. The subtle differences in how I was treated, the constant reminders that I should be grateful for their generosity, the way they spoke about me to others as if I were a project that hadn't turned out as expected. Amanda continued, her voice steady now that the secret was finally exposed. They told me the adoption story when I was 16, making me promise never to tell Dusty. They said it would hurt him to know the truth. But really, they didn't want him to understand why they treated him differently. How were they different with Dusty? Sarah asked gently. Nothing he did was ever good enough. When he got straight A's, they said he was just trying to show off. When he helped elderly neighbors with their computers for free, they accused him of wasting time that should have been spent in the store. When he earned scholarships and awards, they acted like he was stealing attention that belonged to me. Tears were flowing freely down Amanda's cheeks, now years of suppressed guilt finally finding release. I was the golden child, the real daughter who could do no wrong. Dusty was the adopted son who had to constantly prove he deserved to be part of our family. And I let it happen. I let them treat him like an outsider in his own home because it made my life easier. She looked directly at me, her eyes filled with remorse. I'm sorry, Dusty. I'm sorry for all the years I stayed silent while they made you feel like you weren't good enough. I'm sorry for enabling their emotional abuse. And I'm sorry it took this lawsuit for me to finally find the courage to tell the truth. The courtroom was absolutely silent except for the quiet sound of Linda's sobbing. But these weren't the theatrical tears from earlier in the day. These were the sounds of a woman whose carefully constructed lies were collapsing around her. Sarah pressed forward with her questioning. Amanda, did your parents ever express resentment about Dusty's success? Constantly. When his business started growing, Linda would say things like, "We gave that boy everything, and now he thinks he's too good for us." Frank was even worse. He would drink too much and rant about how Dusty was ungrateful and needed to be taken down a notch. Did they ever discuss specific plans to damage his business? Amanda nodded reluctantly. About 6 months ago, they started talking about teaching Dusty a lesson. Linda researched how to sue for intellectual property theft, and Frank began forging documents in the garage. They practiced their stories until they sounded believable. They even watched videos about how to cry on command. The methodical nature of their deception was breathtaking. This wasn't a moment of anger or misunderstanding. It was a calculated campaign designed to destroy everything I had built, orchestrated by the people who should have celebrated my success. Amanda, Sarah continued, you mentioned that Dusty cared about you. Can you elaborate? When I was struggling with addiction, Dusty was the only one who helped. He paid for my first rehabilitation program when our parents refused. He visited me every week, even when I was hostile, and blamed him for our family's problems. He never gave up on me, even when I had given up on myself. She turned to address Judge Harrison directly. Your Honor, my brother built his company with his own hands and his own mind. Our parents contributed nothing except criticism and obstacles. They're suing him now because they finally realized how wrong they were about his potential, and their pride won't let them admit it. They'd rather steal his success than acknowledge their mistakes. Marcus Webb tried one final gambit. Ms. Morrison, you admit you're a drug addict who initially agreed to commit perjury for money. Why should this court believe anything you say? Amanda's response was delivered with quiet dignity. Because I'm here telling the truth when it cost me everything. My parents will never forgive me for this testimony. I'm destroying my relationship with them to protect my brother, just like he protected me when I needed help. That's what real family does. As Amanda stepped down from the witness stand, I felt a mixture of grief and gratitude that threatened to overwhelm me. The truth about my adoption explained so much about my childhood, but it also meant that the people I had considered my parents had never truly accepted me as their son. Judge Harrison called for another brief recess, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. The evidence was becoming overwhelming, and the pattern of deception was undeniable. Frank and Linda had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. and their conspiracy was about to face consequences they never anticipated. But as shocking as Amanda's revelations had been, the worst was yet to come. The investigation into my parents' behavior was about to uncover a conspiracy that reached far beyond family dysfunction into the realm of corporate espionage and criminal fraud. During the afternoon recess, Sarah received an urgent phone call that would change everything. Her private investigator, Tom Bradley, had uncovered evidence that transformed our family dispute into something far more sinister. Tom was a former FBI agent who specialized in white-collar crime investigations. His weathered face and calm demeanor masked a sharp intelligence that had unraveled dozens of corporate conspiracies during his law enforcement career. Today, his discoveries would expose a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of the technology industry. When court reconvened, Sarah requested permission to present new evidence that had emerged during the investigation. Judge Harrison, clearly intrigued by the day's revelations, granted her request with the stipulation that all parties would have equal access to examine the findings. Your Honor, Sarah began. Our investigation has revealed that this lawsuit is not simply a family dispute motivated by greed and resentment. It is part of a carefully orchestrated corporate conspiracy designed to steal my client's intellectual property and destroy his business through fraudulent legal proceedings. She gestured to Tom Bradley, who approached the evidence table carrying a thick folder and several electronic devices. Mr. Bradley, please tell the court what your investigation discovered. Tom's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to testifying in high-stakes criminal cases. Your Honor, we began investigating the plaintiff's financial records after inconsistencies emerged in their testimony. What we found was a paper trail of payments totaling $375,000 from shell companies ultimately controlled by Tech Global Industries. The name Tech Global sent a ripple of recognition through the courtroom. They were one of the largest software companies in the Southwest with annual revenues exceeding $2 billion and a reputation for aggressive acquisition tactics. Tech Global has been monitoring Phoenix Digital Solutions for over 18 months. Tom continued, waiting for an opportunity to acquire their proprietary inventory management software at below-market rates. When direct acquisition attempts failed, they implemented what internal documents refer to as a reputation destruction strategy. Sarah presented a series of documents to the court, bank records, email communications, and internal Tech Global memos that had been obtained through legal channels during the investigation. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, Your Honor. Tech Global would fund a lawsuit designed to bankrupt Phoenix Digital Solutions through legal fees and lost business opportunities. Once the company collapsed, they would acquire the assets through bankruptcy proceedings for a fraction of their true value. Judge Harrison studied the evidence with growing incredulity. Are you telling this court that a major corporation conspired with the defendant's parents to commit fraud? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Your Honor, and we have proof. Tom activated a laptop computer connected to the courtroom's projection system. These are recorded phone conversations between Frank Morrison and Richard Blackstone, CEO of Tech Global Industries. The recordings were obtained legally through a wiretap authorized by federal investigators who have been monitoring Tech Global's business practices. The first recording began to play, and Frank's voice filled the courtroom with damning clarity. Mr. Blackstone, we're ready to move forward with the lawsuit. We've prepared the forged documents you requested, and our lawyer thinks we have a strong case. Blackstone's cultured voice responded with corporate coldness. Excellent. Remember, the goal isn't necessarily to win the lawsuit. We need to tie up their resources and damage their reputation until they're forced to sell. Make sure your testimony is emotional and convincing. Juries love family drama. Linda's voice joined the conversation. What about the $20,000 for our daughter's testimony? Consider it a signing bonus, Blackstone replied. There's another $150,000 waiting when this is finished, plus a permanent consulting contract worth $50,000 annually. Think of it as a comfortable retirement funded by your son's former success. The recording ended in absolute silence. Frank and Linda sat like statues, their faces pale with the realization that their conspiracy had been captured in their own voices. Marcus Webb was frantically scribbling notes, probably calculating his legal exposure for participating in a fraudulent case. But Tom wasn't finished. Your Honor, we also have internal Tech Global documents outlining their strategy in detail. They refer to it as Project Family Tree, and Dusty Morrison's company was one of 12 small businesses targeted for similar treatment. Sarah presented additional evidence organizational charts showing Tech Global's acquisition targets, financial projections based on forced bankruptcies, and email chains discussing the legal and ethical boundaries they were willing to cross. This wasn't an isolated incident, she explained. Tech Global has been systematically destroying small technology companies across the Southwest, using fabricated lawsuits and reputation attacks to force below-market acquisitions. The Morrison family was simply their chosen weapon against Phoenix Digital Solutions. Judge Harrison's expression had transformed from professional interest to barely controlled outrage. 30 years on the bench had taught him to recognize corruption in all its forms. But the brazen nature of this conspiracy clearly exceeded his previous experience. Mr. Bradley, he addressed the investigator directly, have federal authorities been notified of these findings? Yes, Your Honor. FBI agents are currently executing search warrants at Tech Global's headquarters and several subsidiary offices. Richard Blackstone was arrested this morning on charges of conspiracy fraud and violation of federal racketeering statutes. The courtroom erupted in chaos as reporters realized they were witnessing the exposure of a major corporate crime syndicate. Judge Harrison banged his gavel repeatedly, but the excitement was too intense for immediate control. When order was finally restored, Sarah continued her presentation. Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows that Frank and Linda Morrison were co-conspirators in a criminal enterprise designed to steal intellectual property through fraudulent legal proceedings. They accepted payment to commit perjury, forge documents, and destroy their son's business reputation. She turned to address my parents directly. What makes this particularly heinous is that they used their family relationship as a weapon. They exploited the natural assumption that parents wouldn't lie about their children to make their false claims more credible. Tom presented the final piece of evidence, a recorded video conference between my parents and Tech Global executives where they celebrated the potential destruction of my business. Frank could be heard saying, "That ungrateful brat will finally get what he deserves," while Linda laughed about making me crawl back to them broken. The complete lack of parental love in their voices was more devastating than any legal document could have been. These people had never seen me as their son. I was simply an obstacle to be removed when their greed demanded it. Judge Harrison addressed the courtroom with the gravity of someone who understood the precedent being set. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have witnessed here today represents a fundamental attack on the integrity of our legal system. When corporations can purchase false testimony and fabricated evidence to destroy legitimate businesses, the very foundation of American entrepreneurship is threatened. He turned to Frank and Linda with undisguised contempt. As for you, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, you have not only betrayed your son, but also betrayed every honest litigant who has ever sought justice in an American courtroom. Your actions constitute a criminal conspiracy that will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Marcus Webb finally stood his voice defeated. Your Honor, in light of these revelations, the plaintiffs wish to withdraw their complaint immediately. Motion denied, Judge Harrison replied curtly. This case will proceed to its conclusion so that the full extent of this conspiracy can be documented for federal prosecutors. We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock to hear the defendant's motion for sanctions and damages. As the gavel fell, I looked across the courtroom at the two people who had raised me. They sat broken and exposed, their conspiracy crumbling around them like sand castles at high tide. But I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only the hollow sadness that comes from watching people you once loved reveal themselves as strangers. The corporate conspiracy had been unveiled, but the human cost would linger long after the legal proceedings ended. The next morning brought national media attention to our Phoenix courthouse. CNN, Fox News, and several financial networks had dispatched reporters to cover what they were calling the family fraud scandal that exposed corporate America's dirty secrets. Security guards struggled to maintain order as journalists and camera crews competed for the best positions. I arrived early with Sarah, both of us carrying boxes of evidence that would transform me from defendant to prosecutor in this legal drama. Today would be my first opportunity to testify on my own behalf, and I intended to present a counterattack that would leave no doubt about who was telling the truth. Judge Harrison entered promptly at 9 o'clock, his expression suggesting he had spent considerable time reviewing the previous day's revelations. The gallery was packed beyond capacity with overflow crowds watching on monitors in adjacent courtrooms. Before we proceed, Judge Harrison announced, "I want to address the media attention this case has generated. While I recognize the public interest in these proceedings, I will not tolerate any disruption of the legal process. Anyone who cannot maintain courtroom decorum will be removed immediately." Sarah rose to present our motion for sanctions and damages. Your Honor, the evidence of fraud and conspiracy presented yesterday represents only the tip of the iceberg. My client has been gathering evidence of this conspiracy for months, and what he discovered will shock this court and the American people. She gestured for me to take the witness stand, and I felt the weight of dozens of cameras focused on my movement. After being sworn in, I looked directly at Judge Harrison and began telling my side of the story. Your Honor, I suspected something was wrong when our client contracts began disappearing 4 months ago. These weren't normal business fluctuations. Companies that had worked with us for years suddenly terminated relationships without explanation. When I investigated, I discovered someone was spreading lies about my character and business practices. Sarah guided me through my testimony with practiced precision. Dusty, what did you do when you realized your business was under attack? I hired Beacon Security Solutions, a private investigation firm that specializes in corporate espionage cases. I also made the difficult decision to install recording equipment in my parents' home and monitor their communications. The admission caused a stir in the gallery, but Judge Harrison allowed me to continue. Your Honor, I want to be clear about my decision to record my parents. I suspected they were involved in the attacks on my business, but I never imagined the extent of their betrayal. The recordings I'm about to present were obtained legally through a private investigation, and they reveal the true nature of this conspiracy. Sarah activated the courtroom's audio system, and my father's voice filled the room with chilling clarity. The conversation had been recorded 3 months earlier in their kitchen. Linda, that ungrateful brat, is finally going to get what he deserves. Blackstone says we just need to stick to the script and we'll be rich while Dusty loses everything he built. My mother's response was equally cold. I can't wait to see his face when he realizes his own family destroyed him. Maybe next time he'll show us the respect we deserve. Frank continued with growing enthusiasm. The forged documents look perfect. Even if his lawyers suspect something, they'll never be able to prove we created them. And with Amanda's testimony about stealing business ideas, no jury will believe his innocent act. The recording continued for several more minutes, revealing the depth of their planning and the pleasure they took in my anticipated destruction. They discussed coaching fake witnesses, timing the lawsuit for maximum damage, and celebrating their future wealth at my expense. When the recording ended, the courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes, apparently stunned by the casual cruelty in my parents' voices. Your Honor, I continued, that recording was made on March 15th. This next recording was made 2 weeks later during a phone conversation between my mother and Richard Blackstone. Linda's voice came through the speakers with terrifying clarity. Mr. Blackstone, we're ready to move forward with the lawsuit. We've practiced our testimony until it sounds completely natural. Dusty will never suspect his loving parents are behind his downfall. Blackstone's corporate voice responded with professional satisfaction. Excellent work. Our legal team has prepared additional evidence to support your claims. By the time we're finished, Phoenix Digital Solutions will be bankrupt and will acquire their technology for pennies on the dollar. Linda's laugh was like broken glass. That boy always thought he was smarter than everyone else. It's time someone taught him that family loyalty matters more than individual success. The recordings continued for nearly an hour, documenting months of conspiracy planning between my parents and Tech Global executives. They revealed not only the fraudulent lawsuit, but also the systematic sabotage of my business relationships and the recruitment of false witnesses. But the most damaging evidence was yet to come. Sarah presented video recordings obtained from hidden cameras in my parents' garage, where Frank had spent weeks forging the documents presented as evidence in their lawsuit. The first video showed Frank carefully aging paper with coffee stains and artificial wear marks. He referenced printed instructions from Tech Global's legal department, following their guidelines for creating convincing forgeries. Make sure the signatures look natural, Linda advised from off-camera. We need everything to appear authentic under legal scrutiny. Frank nodded, practicing my signature on scrap paper before applying it to the forged business agreements. Blackstone says these documents are the key to winning the case. If we can convince the court that Dusty stole our ideas, we'll own 60% of his company. The video evidence continued with scenes of them rehearsing their courtroom testimony, practicing emotional responses, and discussing how to manipulate jury sympathies. They approached the destruction of my life with the methodical planning of professional criminals. Sarah presented the final piece of evidence, recorded phone conversations between my parents and Amanda, where they offered her $20,000 to commit perjury and threatened family consequences if she refused to cooperate. "Amanda, you owe us loyalty," Frank's voice demanded. "We raised you, fed you, and gave you opportunities. Now it's time to help us get what we deserve from your brother." Amanda's frightened response was barely audible. "I don't want to lie under oath, Dad." "What if we get caught?" "We won't get caught," Linda interrupted, "because Dusty will never suspect his own family would work together against him. His trust in us is his weakness, and we're going to exploit it completely." When the recordings ended, I looked directly at Frank and Linda, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. These weren't the parents who had raised me with love and sacrifice. These were criminals who had used family relationships as weapons in their personal war against my success. Your Honor, I concluded these recordings represent only a fraction of the evidence we've gathered. The conspiracy against Phoenix Digital Solutions was planned for months, funded by Tech Global Industries, and executed by people I trusted with my life. They didn't just want to steal my business. They wanted to destroy me personally and professionally, using our family bond as their primary weapon. Judge Harrison studied the evidence with the thoroughness of someone who understood its historical significance. "Mr. Morrison, this court has never seen such a comprehensive documentation of corporate conspiracy and family betrayal. The evidence you've presented will undoubtedly be used in federal criminal prosecutions." Sarah returned to her table and retrieved one final folder. "Your Honor, there's one more aspect of this case that needs to be addressed. The damages my client has suffered go far beyond financial losses. His reputation, his family relationships, and his ability to trust others have been permanently damaged by this conspiracy." She presented a detailed accounting of the losses Phoenix Digital Solutions had suffered: $800,000 in lost contracts, $4.5 million in failed investment opportunities, $300,000 in legal fees, and immeasurable damage to business relationships that had taken years to build. Furthermore, Sarah continued, "We request that Frank and Linda Morrison be held in contempt of court for perjury, document forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Their actions represent a fundamental attack on the integrity of our legal system. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The truth was finally exposed. Justice was beginning to prevail, but the family I had known was gone forever. The people who raised me had revealed themselves as enemies, and that knowledge would scar me for the rest of my life. But my counterattack was complete, and the evidence was overwhelming. Tomorrow would bring Judge Harrison's verdict and the beginning of consequences that would echo through corporate boardrooms across America. Judge Harrison spent the evening reviewing evidence and consulting with federal prosecutors who had arrived from the Department of Justice's White-Collar Crime Division. When court reconvened the following morning, his demeanor suggested that momentous decisions had been reached. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years spent dispensing justice. "I have presided over thousands of cases during my career, but I have never encountered such a comprehensive conspiracy to defraud both the courts and the American business system. What we have witnessed here represents a fundamental attack on the principles that make our economy possible." He turned to address the packed courtroom directly. "Before rendering my verdict in this civil matter, I want to share something with the court. During our evening recess, I took the unusual step of researching Phoenix Digital Solutions independently. What I discovered only reinforces the magnitude of the fraud we have uncovered." Judge Harrison held up the latest issue of Forbes magazine, its cover, featuring a young entrepreneur surrounded by modern technology. Dusty Morrison and Phoenix Digital Solutions were featured on the cover of this week's Forbes as their Entrepreneur of the Year. The article describes his company as a model of innovative business practices and ethical leadership in the technology sector. My heart stopped as I realized the implications. The same week my parents were accusing me of theft and incompetence, the nation's leading business magazine was celebrating my achievements on a national stage. According to Forbes, Judge Harrison continued, "Phoenix Digital Solutions has revolutionized inventory management for small and medium-sized businesses across the Southwest. Their software has saved client companies over $50 million in operational costs while creating more than 200 permanent jobs in the Phoenix metropolitan area." He set the magazine aside and picked up a legal document. "Furthermore, I have received correspondence from the Federal Bureau of Investigation confirming that their investigation into Tech Global Industries has uncovered evidence of similar conspiracies targeting 12 other small technology companies across the region. Mr. Morrison's case is part of a pattern of corporate predation that threatens the foundation of American entrepreneurship." The FBI confirmation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. What had begun as a family lawsuit had exposed one of the largest corporate fraud schemes in recent Arizona history. Judge Harrison's expression grew stern as he addressed the prosecution table. "Mr. Webb, your clients have not only committed perjury in my courtroom, but have also participated in a criminal conspiracy that extends far beyond this civil proceeding. I am referring this matter to federal prosecutors for immediate criminal investigation." Marcus Webb rose slowly, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Your Honor, my clients were manipulated by sophisticated corporate criminals. They're victims of Tech Global's conspiracy, not willing participants." "Mr. Webb." Judge Harrison replied coldly, "The evidence presented to this court shows your clients actively participating in document forgery, witness intimidation, and the systematic destruction of their son's business reputation. They accepted nearly $400,000 in payments for their participation. These are not the actions of innocent victims." He turned to Frank and Linda, who sat frozen in their chairs, like condemned prisoners awaiting execution. "Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, you have committed crimes that strike at the heart of our legal system. But beyond the legal implications, you have betrayed the most sacred trust that exists in human relationships, the bond between parents and children." Linda finally spoke, her voice broken and desperate. Your Honor, we never meant for it to go this far. Tech Global convinced us that Dusty had stolen from us and we just wanted what was fair. Judge Harrison's response was immediate and unforgiving. Mrs. Morrison, the evidence shows you celebrated the prospect of destroying your son's life. You practiced testimony designed to portray him as mentally unstable and criminally dishonest. You forged documents with the deliberate intent to commit fraud. These are not the actions of confused parents seeking fairness. He consulted his notes before continuing. Furthermore, the recordings presented to this court reveal that you were motivated not by justice, but by greed and resentment. You couldn't accept your son's success because it proved your limitations as parents and business owners. Frank attempted to interrupt, but Judge Harrison cut him off with a sharp gesture. Mr. Morrison, you will have ample opportunity to explain your actions to federal prosecutors and a criminal jury. For now, I will address the civil matters before this court. Judge Harrison stood his robes, creating an imposing silhouette against the wood-paneled wall. In the matter of Morrison versus Morrison, I find for the defendant on all counts. The plaintiff's claims are not only baseless, but constitute a malicious and fraudulent attack on a legitimate business enterprise. He paused to let his words sink in before continuing. Furthermore, I am awarding the defendant damages in the amount of $5.6 million, representing actual business losses, legal fees, and punitive damages for the malicious nature of this conspiracy. The number hit Frank and Linda like a physical blow. They had sued for $12 million and instead faced a judgment that would bankrupt them for the rest of their lives. But Judge Harrison wasn't finished. I am also issuing a permanent injunction preventing the plaintiffs from any further contact with Phoenix Digital Solutions, its employees, clients, or business partners. Any violation of this injunction will result in immediate imprisonment for contempt of court. Sarah squeezed my arm, her professional composure barely containing her satisfaction at the complete vindication of our defense strategy. Additionally, Judge Harrison continued, I am ordering the immediate seizure of all assets received by the plaintiffs from Tech Global Industries or its subsidiaries. These funds represent the proceeds of criminal activity and will be held pending the outcome of federal criminal proceedings. The courthouse erupted in chaos as reporters rushed to file their stories and legal observers processed the magnitude of the verdict. Judge Harrison banged his gavel repeatedly, but the excitement was too intense for immediate control. When order was restored, he addressed the courtroom one final time. Let this case serve as a warning to any individual or corporation that might consider using our legal system as a weapon for personal enrichment. Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice perverted is an attack on civilization itself. As court was adjourned, I watched my parents being led away by federal marshals who had arrived to execute arrest warrants. Linda was sobbing uncontrollably, her theatrical tears replaced by genuine anguish as the reality of prison sentences became unavoidable. Frank walked in stunned silence. His dreams of easy money transformed into a nightmare of criminal prosecution. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of stress lifting from my shoulders. Justice wasn't just beginning to turn. It was flowing like a river, breaking through a dam, carrying away the lies and corruption that had threatened to destroy everything I had built. But the story wasn't over yet. The final chapter would determine whether the damage to my life and business could be repaired, and whether the lessons learned from this betrayal could be transformed into something meaningful and lasting. 6 months after Judge Harrison's verdict, I stood in the same courtroom for the final chapter of this nightmare. Frank and Linda Morrison had pled guilty to federal conspiracy charges and were about to receive their sentences. The courtroom was again packed with reporters, but this time the atmosphere felt different. Justice had prevailed, and the healing process could finally begin. Judge Harrison, presiding over his final hearing before retirement, looked older, but somehow more satisfied than when our ordeal began. Federal prosecutors had used our case as the foundation for dismantling Tech Global's entire criminal enterprise resulting in 17 additional indictments and the recovery of over $200 million in stolen assets. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison. Judge Harrison addressed my parents, who stood before him in orange prison uniforms. You have pled guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, and racketeering. The federal sentencing guidelines recommend 24 to 30 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Linda had aged dramatically during her 6 months in custody. Her carefully maintained appearance had given way to gray hair and the hollow-eyed look of someone who had lost everything that once defined her identity. Frank stood beside her with slumped shoulders, a broken man who finally understood the consequences of his choices. However, Judge Harrison continued, the court recognizes that you were recruited and manipulated by sophisticated corporate criminals who exploited your personal grievances for their own profit. Therefore, I am sentencing you each to 18 months in federal prison with the possibility of early release after 12 months for good behavior. The sentence was lighter than expected, but it carried conditions that would follow them for the rest of their lives. They would be permanently barred from corporate board positions, prohibited from investment activities, and required to make full restitution for the damages they had caused. As they were led away by federal marshals, Linda turned to look at me one final time. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and I saw something I'd never expected: genuine remorse. Not the theatrical sorrow she had performed for juries, but the authentic grief of a mother who finally understood what she had destroyed. Frank didn't look back. He walked toward his future with the same stubborn pride that had led him down this path, apparently unable to accept responsibility even in defeat. After the sentencing, Sarah and I walked outside into the bright Arizona sunshine. The media attention had transformed me from an unknown entrepreneur into a reluctant symbol of small business resilience, but the spotlight felt uncomfortable rather than rewarding. How does it feel to have it finally over? Sarah asked as we stood on the courthouse steps. Empty, I admitted. I thought justice would feel more satisfying, but mostly, I just feel sad about what we all lost along the way. The months following the trial had brought remarkable changes to Phoenix Digital Solutions. The publicity surrounding our case had attracted national attention from potential clients and investors who admired our refusal to surrender in the face of corporate bullying. Our revenue had tripled, and we now employed 46 people in a new headquarters building in downtown Scottsdale. But success felt hollow without family to share it with. The people who should have celebrated my achievements had chosen to destroy them, instead leaving me with wealth and recognition, but also with profound loneliness. The healing process began unexpectedly 3 months later when Amanda knocked on my office door. She looked healthier than I had seen her in years, with clear eyes and the confident posture of someone who had finally made peace with her demons. I've been sober for 14 months, she announced without preamble. I testified against our parents, completed a rehabilitation program, and started working with a therapist who specializes in family trauma. I think I'm ready to be the sister you deserved all along. We talked for hours that day, unpacking decades of family dysfunction and beginning the slow process of building an authentic relationship. Amanda had her own guilt to process, her own amends to make, but her courage in finally telling the truth had created space for forgiveness and growth. I offered her a position at Phoenix Digital Solutions, starting in our customer service department, while she completed her college degree in business administration. Watching her rebuild her life with determination and humility reminded me that redemption was possible even after the deepest betrayals. Jake Morrison had also grown during this ordeal, transforming from my business partner into something resembling a brother. His loyalty during the darkest days of the conspiracy had proved that family could be chosen rather than inherited. We formalized our partnership with a new corporate structure that reflected his contributions to our success. The company's growth allowed us to establish the Phoenix Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting entrepreneurs who faced family rejection or abandonment because of their business ambitions. Our first annual scholarship program awarded grants to 12 young people who had been disowned for pursuing education or careers that disappointed their families. Standing before an audience of 500 people at our scholarship ceremony, I shared the lessons I had learned from my journey through betrayal and redemption. Success without integrity is just sophisticated theft, I told the assembled entrepreneurs and students. Building something meaningful requires not just intelligence and determination, but also the courage to surround yourself with people who celebrate your achievements rather than resenting them. I paused to look at Amanda and Jake, who sat in the front row with expressions of pride that my biological parents had never shown. Family isn't defined by blood relations or legal documents. It's defined by who stands with you when everything falls apart, who believes in your potential when others see only problems, and who finds joy in your success and rather than looking for ways to diminish it. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause, but the real satisfaction came from seeing young people in the crowd nodding with recognition. They understood the pain of family disappointment and the hope of creating chosen families built on mutual respect and genuine love. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. My parents disowned me for starting a technology company instead of becoming a doctor like they planned. Your story helped me understand that their limitations don't define my potential. Conversations like that one reminded me why the pain of the past year had been worthwhile. If my experience could help others navigate similar challenges, then the betrayal and legal battles had served a greater purpose. The final resolution came on a quiet evening in December, when I received a handwritten letter from Linda, postmarked from the Federal Correctional Facility where she was serving her sentence. The letter was brief but authentic in a way her previous communications had never been. "Dusty," she wrote, "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, and I'm not writing to seek pity or early reconciliation. I'm writing because you deserve to know that I finally understand what I destroyed, and I'm sorry in ways that words cannot express. You were an extraordinary child who grew into a remarkable man, and I was too blind with my own limitations to see your potential. I let resentment and pride turn me into something monstrous, someone who could celebrate my own son's destruction for personal gain. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I understand why you can never trust me again, but I want you to know that your success makes me proud, even though I forfeited the right to share in that pride through my actions. Build a beautiful life, son. Surround yourself with people who deserve your loyalty and kindness. Don't let what we did to you prevent you from trusting others who prove themselves worthy of your faith. Love, Mom." I read the letter several times, surprised by the depth of emotion it stirred. Part of me wanted to respond with anger to remind her of all the damage she had caused that could never be repaired. But another part recognized the courage it had taken to write such an honest acknowledgement of her failures. I didn't write back, but I kept the letter in my desk drawer as a reminder that people could change even when redemption came too late to restore what had been lost. As I write this story 2 years later, Phoenix Digital Solutions has grown into a $50 million company with offices in 6 states and over 120 employees. We've been featured in Inc. magazine, Harvard Business Review, and dozens of other publications as an example of ethical business practices and innovative management. Amanda completed her degree and now serves as our Director of Human Resources, bringing empathy and understanding to employees who face their own family challenges. Jake and I have built a company culture based on chosen family principles, where loyalty is earned through character rather than demanded through obligation. The Phoenix Foundation has awarded over $2 million in scholarships to young entrepreneurs whose families rejected their ambitions. Watching these students build successful companies and meaningful relationships reminds me daily that the cycle of family dysfunction can be broken through conscious choices and authentic connections. Frank died of a heart attack during his final month of incarceration, apparently unable to cope with the loss of everything he had considered important. I attended his funeral alone, feeling sadness for the man he could have been if pride and resentment hadn't consumed his capacity for love. Linda was released early for good behavior and now lives in a small apartment in Tucson, working as a bookkeeper for a nonprofit organization that serves formerly incarcerated women. We exchange Christmas cards, but nothing more. Some bridges burn completely, leaving only lessons and scars where relationships once existed. The lesson I've learned from this journey is that true success isn't measured by financial achievement or public recognition, but by the relationships we build with people who choose to love us for who we are rather than what we can provide. Family loyalty that demands sacrifice of integrity isn't loyalty at all. It's manipulation disguised as love. I've also learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. You can release anger and resentment without restoring trust or relationship with people who have proved themselves unworthy of your faith. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the poison of hatred, not about giving others permission to hurt you again. Most importantly, I've discovered that chosen families built on mutual respect and genuine affection provide deeper satisfaction than blood relationships maintained through guilt and obligation. The people who celebrate your success and support your dreams are your real family regardless of their genetic connection to your past. Today I'm surrounded by people who knew nothing about my adoption or my parents' betrayal when they chose to love me. They judge me by my character, celebrate my achievements without resentment, and offer support during challenges without keeping score of their sacrifices. That's what real family looks like, people who want to see you succeed because your happiness increases their own, who find joy in your accomplishments, because they understand that love multiplies when it's shared rather than hoarded. Building Phoenix Digital Solutions taught me about business and technology, but surviving my parents' betrayal taught me about life and relationships. Both lessons were necessary for becoming the man I am today. Even though I would never choose to repeat the pain that made the growth possible. As I finish writing this story, I want to ask you something that might help both of us understand these complicated family dynamics better. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and personal integrity? How did you navigate that impossible decision? And what did you learn about the difference between love and manipulation? Your experiences and insights could help others who face similar challenges, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with your own journey, I'd be grateful if you would like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming family betrayal and building authentic relationships. Most importantly, please share this story with anyone who might benefit from understanding that they don't have to accept toxic family dynamics just because blood relationships are involved. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is establish boundaries that protect your integrity and well-being. Thank you for taking this journey with me through pain and betrayal toward healing and redemption. I hope my experience helps you build the authentic family relationships you deserve, whether they're with the people who raised you or the ones you choose along the way. Remember, your worth isn't determined by your family's ability to recognize your value. You have the right to surround yourself with people who celebrate your potential and support your dreams. That's not selfishness. That's self-respect. And it's the foundation of every meaningful relationship you'll ever build. May you find the courage to choose love over loyalty when the two conflict, and may you build a chosen family that brings out the best in who you're meant to become.